Hello, comrades. Good afternoon to those who watch us from Europe, and good morning to those who watch us from the United States. My name is Comrade Vasily. Comrade Thomas, can you make your sound more silent? Yeah, thank you.
All who are watching, I'm Thomas. I'm another Politsturm comrade from America, and we're here, as you may know, to talk about the Palestine issue, which is very sensitive and disheartening for many. So we're going to approach it with seriousness, and we're going to try to talk about these issues in a straightforward way today.
Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you have not done it before. And of course, support our project by clicking the link you see on your screens, stream.politsturm.com. You can ask us a question and we will answer it right now during the stream.
So, well, we could talk about the issue right away. We could talk about the context of this situation. What do you think, Vasily?
First of all, I think we have to say that this day, this Saturday, marks 3 weeks from the escalation of the Arab-Israeli conflict, during which thousands of Palestinians were killed, hundreds of Israelis were killed as well, and hundreds of thousands of people living right now in the Gaza Strip were forced to relocate. The IDF has bombed a large part of the Gaza Strip. Hamas is launching rockets on the Israeli cities, and the events keep unfolding right now. It was yesterday when we announced the stream. The Israeli forces, the IDF, also announced that they're expanding their land operation in the Gaza Strip, and they launched several airstrikes in the city of Gaza. And right now we see the leaders of many states around the world showing their position on this conflict. The communists have also been showing this position for the last several weeks. And on this stream we will talk about the ongoing state of the conflict, about its history, show some problems and mistakes made by communists, debunk some common myths about this conflict, and of course make some outlines on what the communist position should be on the conflict between Palestine, Israel.
Right. There's a lot of discussion right now about what should be done by communists in Israel, and there's a lot of theoretical issues that overhang that, and wrong approach to these theoretical issues are going to lead a lot of people down the wrong path to either kind of a nihilistic state of inaction, or a kind of the opposite reaction where you kind of have an extreme over support for action and just doing anything that can be done. That's good, as long as you're doing something. But well, currently we're hearing a lot of people call for ceasefires. The UN, but also many of the more right-wing socialists, like the CPUSA here in America, they're saying, oh, we're calling for a ceasefire, and that's even among Democrats in office in the United States. They're saying, oh, we're calling for a ceasefire, and I mean, that's basically, we have to translate that, which is unusual for a communist, as Marx, pointed out many years ago, that we disdain to hide our true meaning and our true platform. But calling for a ceasefire, basically, we're begging Israel to stop. We're trying to use diplomatic pressure to ask nicely for Israel to cease the operation, and that simply, it's contrary to what people understand about the conflict. So hopefully we can get more into that. And on the other side, about escalation and the opposite of a ceasefire, you have the axis of resistance and these other many Islamist groups who are acting right now. And recently, in the past week or 2 weeks, we've had a incredible expansion of the conflict outside the borders of Israel, with Hezbollah in Lebanon on the northern border of Israel, and other groups, militias from Iraq and Syria are kind of focusing in on occupied regions in the north of Israel, like the Golan Heights and other occupied parts of Lebanon as well. So this really is has already expanded into a regional conflict involving all these different countries that we'll get into. So I think calling for a ceasefire for Israel, Israel is just going to say, oh well, look, we're under attack from the north now, and we can't stop our operation. And that's what they said in response to the historic resolution in the UN. I believe this was yesterday, the 27th, that UN called for a ceasefire, and Israel said, no, we're not gonna cease firing. We're going to destroy Hamas. We're gonna continue this invasion of Gaza to overthrow Hamas. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about why they're invading Gaza, and why is Lebanon and Syria and Iraq, why are these countries involved in even as far away as Yemen?
Mm, I agree, but first of all, we'll have to briefly describe the situation of the last 3 weeks. Would you like to do it?
Well, sure. As you mentioned earlier, 3 weeks ago, this operation by Hamas began on October 7th, which they call Al-Aqsa Flood. The Al-Aqsa Flood operation, this caused an immense reaction among leftists and people around the world, because it did something that had really never been seen in the conflict before, that Palestinians in Gaza, which is on the border of Egypt, on the Mediterranean Ocean of Israel. Gaza has been totally under the control of Israel for many years. And what was so astounding was that Hamas was able to break out of this entrenchment and these walls that Israel has built around Gaza, and as Hamas captured territory all around the region of Gaza, to the north and to the east, for several kilometers. They had a zone of control, which many maps were shared, and it looked very impressive. It was like a traditional military thing, where they're capturing territory and they're holding positions, and people were very impressed that they were able to hold these positions for several days. But now, bringing this up is not very often done, right? Bringing up this military success of Hamas in terms of a ground war, it's not talked about because they quickly lost this territory. But to speak about Al-Aqsa Flood briefly, it's named after the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which I believe in English is called the Dome of the Rock. Please, I'm sorry if I forget the correct English, but it's named after the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is in Israel, or occupied Palestine, as we could call it. And what they're doing by calling it the Al-Aqsa Flood, Hamas is an Islamist organization, which we'll get into what that means. But the naming of the operation itself is tying it to this historic mosque, which unites Israel, or unites Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They all have ties to this kind of holy site. And what the operation being named after this site means is that In recent months and years, Israel has been kind of limiting and repressing the use of the mosque by Muslims, which is kind of a violation of all these international agreements that have been built up over decades. But yeah, within the past months before the operation, Israel was firing tear gas into the mosque and beating people on the steps leading up to the mosque. So by naming the operation after this kind of context, it's a rallying cry for the region. It's a rallying cry for the international Muslim community, especially. They're saying it's by rhetorically saying that Muslims are being oppressed, and this operation in Gaza is kind of a stand for all oppressed Muslims who are facing religious oppression. So that's the framing that's been given. And in this operation, many rockets were fired from Gaza, which was supposedly surprised Israel, surprised Mossad, and this incredible surveillance technology and military buildup around Gaza was totally unprepared for this for some reason. And many Israelis were killed in this initial fighting. I think something like 1,000 Israelis were killed in these early days. But since that early period of success for Hamas and the other militias that are based in Gaza, like Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and there's many other militias that are going to be wrapped up in what we're talking about. But yeah, there were many Israeli deaths early on, but after that, very few Israeli deaths since then. And as you mentioned, Vasily, something like 7,000 at least Palestinians have been killed, mostly in Gaza by Israeli bombing. In retaliation. So this is a retaliation that Israel has been happy and waiting to deliver on this kind of imprisoned
Mm-hmm.
community in Gaza.
I'd like to interrupt you because I want to show the map of the Hamas advance on this territory. It's currently on your screens, and this was claimed the area where the Hamas fighters have expanded during their first days of their Al-Aqsa Flood operation. However, later they were expelled by the IDF, and IDF is currently controlling basically all the border between Israel and the Gaza Strip. One thing that's worth mentioning is that besides Israel, the only land border of the Gaza Strip is with Egypt. However, there are only several checkpoints. One of them was closed shortly after the conflict started, and the naval border is mostly controlled by Israel as well.
I would like to correct what I said earlier about Al-Aqsa Mosque. As I said, I gave it the wrong English name. It's not connected to what I had said before, but the importance is that it's under kind of an independent Islamic control in Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa Mosque, and so this it's connected with the government of Jordan. So this kind of military action and police action at the mosque by Israel is a violation. Is a total violation, and I guess it is connected to Dome of the Rock in a sense. It's similar. It's neighboring it, but it's the point is that Israel has violated the rights of Muslims to use this religious space, which is a shared sacred space for many communities, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim. So yeah, I wanted to correct myself from earlier that, but the importance is that Israel, or sorry, Muslims have a legal right to use this mosque, and that right was overwritten. So this Al-Aqsa Flood, is kind of a call to say, hey, our rights are being violated. We're now going to strike back against this decades of violation. But I think we should look seriously now at the military aspect, not just the social, what brought about this flood and the rhetorical framing of this Al-Aqsa flood, but this military success that they were celebrating. And I believe there's even more territory taken than what is impressively shown in this map on screen right now. But militarily, people were celebrating it, people on the left, but it's frustrating because it's not a serious military control. It was a temporary situation, and it was utilized. Temporarily, this zone of control was used to kidnap hostages, which give Hamas and other militias leverage, against bombing and this retaliation by Israel. But what did this military control of this land in Israel really accomplish? And that's one concern that I had immediately, that they take this territory, but then quickly lose it. And so what did we gain? What did the Palestinian resistance gain from this control of this land if they immediately lose it?
I would like to point the attention of our viewers to the actual size of the Gaza Strip and the state of Israel. So right now you can see on your screens the map of Palestine and the map of Israel changed throughout the decades. First of all, we have the map of initial Arab and Israeli settlements back in 1946. Later, we have the United Nations plan to separate both states. Then we have the borders of 1967, and on the right side, we have basically the current state of the land controlled by Israel and by Palestine. And if you can see, the Gaza Strip is a very, very small piece of land. However, this piece of land contains more than 2 millions of people, and it's extremely overpopulated because these 2 millions are mostly refugees from the former Palestine lands that were claimed by Israel. The situation in the Gaza Strip was described as the humanitarian disaster basically a decade before the current events, starting from 2007. And this situation was only worsening. From the information I've seen, the unemployment rate in the Gaza Strip was about 50%. It means basically half of the population of the Gaza Strip had no job. And you can see that the offensive that was launched by Hamas against the IDF. Tom, can you disable your speakers? So this offensive that was launched by Hamas had the goals of this offensive are quite vague. What we saw was only epic words and slogans about avenging Al-Aqsa. This is why it's called Al-Aqsa Flood. However, in reality, it was not an offensive, but more of a raid. You see, they got some land, they broke the wall, and I'd like to say that Israel made fences basically on the whole border with Gaza Strip, besides several checkpoints. So they broke these border fences. They engaged in several Israeli settlements. And this map that showed their advance 3 weeks ago, this advance was quickly reduced to the initial Gaza Strip borders by the IDF, and right now the IDF on itself is engaging in the Gaza Strip. And if you compare the forces of Hamas and the forces of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, you can clearly say that there is no way Hamas would be able to achieve victory over the Israeli forces in open battle. From what I know, they have several tens of thousands of people in their forces, and the IDF has basically almost a million. They have several hundred thousands soldiers right now, and when the conflict started, they also managed to recruit about 300,000 reservists, even from Europe. There were news materials about the idea of planes, emergency planes traveling to Europe with the task of getting the Israeli citizens and sending them back to Israel. So the goals of this operation performed by Hamas were quite vague and unknown. You see, they made not just they didn't make any success, but it's unknown what they were counting on, like what were they hoping for. At this point, I also have to say that what we're speaking about as Palestine is not actually Palestine. So here is this map again, and on this map you can see that Palestine, like the Palestinian territories, are now basically divided into several exclaves. The major of them are, of course, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And the West Bank is from the West Bank of the River Jordan. This region is controlled by so-called State of Palestine, and the State of Palestine was proclaimed in 2013 by the Palestinian National Authority, which is controlled by the Palestinian party Fatah. It's mostly secular organization. It's led by Mahmoud Abbas, and previously it was led by famous Yasser Arafat. And this one is the guy who made all this struggle really famous back in the late 20th century. Yeah, exactly. And the Gaza Strip is the territory that is mostly controlled by Hamas. However, the state of Palestine has no control over the Gaza Strip. Since in early 2000s there were elections in the Gaza Strip in which Hamas was the organization that won those elections, and in 2007 they even launched basically a civil war against Fatah and the PLO. And since then they managed to achieve control over the Gaza Strip, and the Palestinian authorities on their side well, formally they control the whole West Bank. In reality, however, the majority of these territories, about 60%, are now occupied by the IDF, and the state of Palestine, in fact, controls only about 20 or 30% of this land.
Through.
Yeah,
Uh,
fix it.
Oh, and I wanted to say to the chat now that I'm reading the chat now. People were asking if we were reading it, but there are many questions that are being asked in the chat that we're going to get to. So we're not going to jump the gun for some of these questions, but just don't worry that we are going to ask, or we are going to answer these questions from the chat. But in our own time.
Yeah, I'll interrupt you, but I want to say hello to all those who joined us recently. Today we're covering the Arab-Israeli conflict, the current escalation, and the communist position on this topic. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have not done it before. At the end of the stream, we will take a quick look at the questions in the chat. However, if you want your question to be answered right now on the stream, you can support the project by clicking on the link which is currently in the chat. And now we're getting back to our topic. Since there were lots of events for the last 3 weeks, I think, Tom, that it would be better to point 2 or 3, the most important of them, show the timeline, and go to the events of the previous day.
And we can talk about Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, and Yemen as well, and what they have to do with, there's recent developments with these as well. I don't know, do you have something you'd like to begin on, Vasily?
Sure. So, as we said before, Hamas launched their raid, during which they managed to capture several Israeli settlements. There were materials about Hamas soldiers killing civilians, especially at the music festival that took place on that day. There were also footage of them allegedly killing children. However, a lot of media claimed it was fake news. And in several days, the IDF managed to launch a successful counteroffensive, reducing the territory controlled by Hamas to their pre-escalation conditions. And after that, Israel announced that they will cut supplies from the Gaza Strip because, as you can see on the map, Gaza Strip is mostly bordered with Israel, and in fact it was Israel who provided the Gaza Strip with supplies, water, electricity, fuel. So they responded with cutting those supplies, and they also launched massive air and rocket strikes on the Gaza Strip. These were mostly aimed at hitting the civilian targets. One of the notorious events was the rocket that struck the hospital and several Christian churches. The IDF claimed it was Hamas. Hamas claimed it was the IDF. However, the majority of opinions are about the IDF actually commencing these strikes because, well, they are doing this basically all these weeks.
Right, and the IDF said that they would bomb it. They gave notice in advance, and they've struck the other hospitals. So they have no opposition to striking hospitals in other situations, and they've struck the same hospital, which is actually run by a church, a Christian church, an international Christian organization. They hit that the Al-Ali hospital with artillery shells previously.
So the current state is that the IDF are preparing for a large-scale ground invasion. During the previous weeks, they were clearing the routes for their ground forces. They were destroying basically entire neighborhoods. They targeted especially rich neighborhoods where the senior officials of Hamas were living, and from the satellite photos, it looked like they, instead of fighting in the city, they wanted to make big, large routes that would allow their ground forces to advance in the city without any major troubles. It's important to say that, of course, Israel doesn't want to fight in the city area, and fighting in the city area is always a big problem for those who perform this offensive. It was a problem in the previous century. It was a problem in the end of the 20th century when all those wars in Iraq, in Somalia, in Afghanistan showed. And it's really important now when the infantry, the modern infantry, has lots of things like anti-tank guided missiles, especially drones. And we saw many videos of Hamas hitting the Israeli tanks with basically one drone with a grenade. Of course, Israel wants to avoid this situation.
Right. And another thing about urban warfare is that Israel's weapons and their use of missiles and explosives and things are going to cause lots of casualties. So Israel are interested in, from many different perspectives, on depopulating this northern part of Gaza where they are concentrating their offensive. But yeah, they want to basically blow it up and clear out this area, right? And they can move tanks in and create open space for their tanks and trucks to move in. But this depopulation of northern Gaza serves many different purposes as well. It allows them to shoot freely and not have to worry as much about killing people, which that's one of their main worries, is this propaganda aspect of people realizing, oh my God, so many Palestinians are being killed. But also that depopulating. So it has that military aspect, this depopulating, but it's also has a huge economic and social factor that when they occupy this part of northern Gaza after the war, this state of occupation and this depopulation will encourage settlement by Israelis. So Israeli businesses can come into northern Gaza, which they've been excluded from for recent days or recent years. So we're going to see an explosion of Israeli capital, and it allows a growth into a new market, basically. Which is a big part of the Israeli economy, is this constant expansion of settlements and petty bourgeois farms and these things onto quote unquote Palestinian land. But really, this is territory over which Israeli monopolies have established relationships of dependency over. And this is something you referenced earlier, Vasily, that Israel controls the water, they control the electricity, they control access to food, especially because they control these border checkpoints. So Israel has established absolute dependency over Gaza, and so now, where is the new money going to be found? Well, by blowing up buildings, and then Israeli companies get the money for building them, and Israeli companies get to enter into Gaza, which they've been excluded from in past decades.
Sure, and during the previous day, as I said before, Israel announced they're going to expand their ground invasion. There were news about them finally starting this. However, later it was changed to they simply announced they will expand this. And right now, from the latest news, we saw that the leaders of the neighbor countries of the region, like Turkey, especially Turkey, announced that they will not support Israel, and in fact, they will oppose that. Erdogan even made a giant speech on this topic with claims like 100 years ago, Palestine was our territory. The Gaza Strip was a part of our territories, which we didn't even supposed to lose. And he said that Israel is an occupant state, their group, not a state, and if they want the war between the cross and the how it's spelled in English. Yeah, and between the cross and the crescent, they will get it. So Turkey are showing their imperialist ambitions in the region, and I wouldn't say that they want to liberate the people of Palestine. They want to show their military capabilities, just like they did recently with the conflict in the Karabakh region, which itself happened basically a month ago, in the late September, when Azerbaijan succeeded in taking over the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic in Armenia, and Turkey supported this decision because they their policy towards Azerbaijan is very friendly. They consider each other big friends.
Right, brother states, basically. And it's very funny that Turkey is now positioning itself as this, representative of Islam and the enemy of Israel, when Turkey and many other of these capitalist Muslim states have said, or have in serious relationships with Israel, economic relationships, political relationships with Israel. And now Turkey is saying, oh, this is the new Crusades, and Saudi Arabia is chiming in with similar statements. But it's these nations who have only recently had rapprochement with Israel and signed new agreements and recognitions between Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Israel. After decades and decades of denying diplomatic recognition for Israel by all these states, in recent years they've completely abandoned this kind of nominal opposition to Israel, which was always only nominal anyway. But in recent years, even that front, that facade has fallen away. So these nation states, Saudi Arabia and Turkey, they desperately need to launder their reputation among oppressed Muslims around the world, especially in Palestine. So this is a great opportunity for these capitalist states to wave the flag and go and rah 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 and rally people to support these capitalist regimes, under the cover of, Muslims have to act together, and this is a civilizational conflict between Islam and the West, and there's similar things being said with the U.S. and Israel as well, that the U.S. supports Israel completely, and all the Western countries support Israel completely, and they want to condemn all resistance to these Israeli companies and these Israeli monopolies establishing, extreme exploitation. They want to be able to label this as, anyone who complains about Israel is an Islamist. Anyone who complains about the West, they're associated with the axis of resistance and Iran and Turkey and all these nation states. So the propaganda again is so important for what's going on right now.
I'd like to point the attention of our viewers at the map, which is right now on the screen. I think we will start by showing the interests of Israel in the conflict. On one side, it's quite simple. Israel is well known to be supported by large American and European capitals. It's well-known bulwark of NATO in the Middle East, and for the capitalists, it's in priority to secure security of Israel in this region, to bring as much stability as possible. Especially when during the last G20 summit, Biden announced a project that will make an alternative trade route from India through the Middle East to Europe. And it was announced that it would be created firstly from India to the Arab Emirates, then a railway from Emirates to Saudi Arabia, through Jordan, and finally through Israel, and it will end in Greece. And this route would make an alternative for China's new Silk Road initiative. So we can clearly see that Israel has a lot of interest in securing their part of the route. They want to deal with Hamas, with the Palestinian problem, and of course, since Israel was created as a mono-ethnic state, they want to get rid of Palestinians. This is the result of their policies for the last decades. However, at the same time, they are not interested in solving the problem completely. You see, the whole situation is that Israel has a giant military industrial complex. It has a giant army, which showed that they can actually achieve victory over the countries that surround them. They managed to do it at least several times in their history. First of all, starting with the War of Independence in 1948, then it's the War of 1967, later conflicts in early 70s, and during all this time, Israel always managed to secure its borders from neighboring Arab countries. However, ending the Palestinian problem completely, like, for example, forcing all the Palestinian Arabs out of the territory controlled by Israel, would make it useless for their militarism, for their military forces, for their military research, military industrial complex, because they receive funding based on this threat, on the existence of this threat. So what they say is that you see, there is a threat. These Arabs constantly shell us with their rockets, with artillery, and we need our forces to be strong enough to counter them. And this is why they don't want to get rid of it completely. On the other side, they want a constant threat, like not a big threat, but strong enough to show that the IDF are required. They need to be strong because, look, there is Hamas. They need to be strong because, look, they make terrorism acts, they bomb, they launch rockets. We need IDF to be strong. And this is the way how they justify their ultra-militarism in the region. It's especially important if we remember that Israel is currently ruled by far rights. The Israel party Likud is a party that is like ultra hostile towards Palestinians. It kept this way for many decades. And of course, they are interested in the current escalation. If you remember, during the previous months, Netanyahu government was threatened with this judicial reform. A lot of people were brought on the streets of the Israeli cities, claiming they wanted Netanyahu to resign, but he refused. And right when this escalation started, when this Al-Aqsa Flood operation by Hamas started, the Netanyahu government announced they're gonna make national unity. They're in the state of war. They called for everyone to unite. And in fact, that Sunday, on the next day when the conflict started, was the first in about 30 weeks without any protests. Because thanks to the Hamas escalation, the Netanyahu government managed to suppress any protest movements with giant flow of nationalism, of chauvinism, of militarism, and of course they are interested in the existence of this threat as Hamas.
Right, and
yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry, I will finish. So the position of Israel is quite known, but their motives in this conflict are not something that lies in the open field. And this is why it's important to show that, like, yes, they're doing all these things. They're bombing children, they're bombing civilians. They have been doing it for basically decades. They have been getting the Gaza Strip in blockade for a decade as well, but they don't want to end this once and for all. This would be a problem bigger than the existence of the Gaza Strip for them.
Right, absolutely. And I wanted to point out how strange it is, the policies of this Netanyahu government for the past many years now, a decade now, that and in more recent years, Netanyahu said, oh, Hamas is interested in peace. Hamas is interested in talks and normal relations, you know, as a kind of a political government for the Gaza Strip. And it's, you know, very funny almost that this extreme far-right leader, representative of the Likud party that was so extreme in its opposition to Palestinian rights, and I think Netanyahu is basically called the settlement candidate. That Netanyahu represents these forces of these kibbutz and settlements, these which is a kind of unique economic situation in Israel where Israelis are given permission to steal land basically from Palestinians through this legal process and supported by the government. So Netanyahu represents this extremely reactionary force. So why would Netanyahu say that Hamas is reasonable and we can work with them? It's very funny, especially for people who say that Israel is as horrible as it is, and yet Hamas is a reasonable reaction to that. And to talk about that relationship, why Netanyahu would defend Hamas and these things, it's because Netanyahu has been carrying out a policy of diplomatic and financial relations with Hamas for the past 10 years. Back in 2012 and for many years after that, Netanyahu negotiated with Qatar, which is this Gulf state oil monarchy to the south, and Netanyahu gave permission for Qatar to give tons and tons of money, hundreds of millions of dollars in short periods of time. I believe something like $1 billion a year almost. Maybe it's actually a billion cumulatively, but Netanyahu personally, was involved in continuing this money from Qatar going to Hamas, and people who could be confused by this situation. But I think it becomes more clear the more we're going to talk about it. The more we're going to lay out, what Hamas is. It's going to be more clear. Why would Netanyahu arrange and allow for hundreds of millions of dollars to go to Hamas? And why would Netanyahu say that Hamas isn't going to use that money to build rockets and to build up its military forces? Well, we have a quote from Netanyahu here that says that this is from 2019, after Netanyahu asked his intelligence agency, asked Mossad to go to Qatar and beg them, please send more money to Hamas. It would be very reasonable to be confused by this. But so Netanyahu explains it very simply right here. He says, the money transfer is part of the strategy to divide the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. Right, because there's Fatah in the West Bank and there's Hamas in Gaza. Anyone who opposes the establishment of a Palestinian state needs to support the transfer of money from Qatar to Hamas. In that way, we will foil the establishment of a Palestinian state. And that's from the quote by Netanyahu from a cabinet member of his government. So it's very simple here that there's something going on where Hamas is useful to Netanyahu, the most extreme right-wing leadership that Israel has ever had. And in recent days, after the October 7th attacks, this extreme right-wing party has become entrenched in government because of emergency powers that have been granted to it because of this conflict which they fostered. They allowed Hamas to have this military buildup. They didn't prevent Hamas from attacking it in any way. And people are now angry at Netanyahu. Why didn't Mossad report that this was coming? Why didn't the IDF stop them from taking Israeli territory to such an extreme degree? And what's really interesting is that they now are able to use this opportunity, use this crisis to establish a mandated control, a coalition over parliament. They've integrated the opposition under Netanyahu's leadership at a time when, as you mentioned, Vasily, Netanyahu is more unpopular than he's ever been among Israelis, right? Even among right-wing Israelis. And I wanted to finish up by saying, that these extreme powers are, something that Netanyahu really has been hoping to acquire in order to carry out his policy, which, as I said before, he's the settlement candidate. So these extreme powers and this war cabinet powers are going to be used to carry out this expansion of settlements and expansion of this reactionary policy in a way that it has never been possible in the past many decades for Israel to do. So in a way, this operation by Hamas, I mentioned earlier that it has this strange military ineffectiveness, as a strange military character, and at the same time, it's militarily and politically helping the most extreme forces that control Israel and Palestine.
So if we make a little conclusion, the Israeli forces in the region, Israel itself, is supported by American and European capitalists. However, Hamas was also supported by Israel itself, and it has a strong regional power such as Iran behind its back. In fact, if you look at all those rocket strikes from the Gaza Strip, you may wonder where do they get all the money and equipment to make it possible. And the answer is that for the previous decade, Hamas managed to establish basically a military industry in the Gaza Strip. They produce not just rockets, they produce rockets and high technical drones. All these developments were supplied by Iran. They're made using Iranian blueprints and, of course, using Iranian money. Also, there was information about different weapon transfers going very interesting routes through Africa and then to Hamas in the Gaza Strip. But the main thing is that their current raid, their Al-Aqsa Flood operation, their constant rocket and drone strikes on the Israeli territory wouldn't be possible if they were not funded by millions from Iran. And another side is different Middle Eastern gasoline stations, I would say. Countries like Qatar, like United Arab Emirates, especially Qatar, these guys funded, for example, Islamic State, ISIS, and they also funded pro-NATO Islamists in Libya, the ones which overthrew Gaddafi in the early 2010s. Sorry. So these guys are supporting basically any Islamists in the region, and they have their hands in Hamas as well. Hamas again wouldn't be able to become such a strong power if it wasn't thanks to millions of dollars they received from trading oil by the Middle Eastern Islamists. And the thing that may surprise you is that Hamas itself was created with the direct support of Israel. In fact, before its creation in 1987, Islamists operated in the Gaza Strip under the slogans of religious care organizations, and they were supported by Israel because first of all, they were shown as alternative to the actual Palestinian resistance fighters. You see, back in the 20th century, the Soviet Union, many progressive forces supported the Palestinian struggle, and not just because they wanted to, like, just they're fighting and that's all, but because the forces that were struggling against Israel, against the Israeli militarism, were in fact secular left-wing forces, and what they advocated for was firstly the destruction of the Israeli state. But they stood for creation of a state of Palestine where everyone, Arabs, Christians, and Jews, could coexist peacefully. And there were even organizations that called for a socialist solution of this problem. They were supported by the Soviet Union, by money, by their equipment, and the whole Palestinian independence struggle was firstly very secular, and secondly left-wing. And this is why Israel supported Hamas. They saw them as an alternative, as the way to split the Palestinian resistance, and they probably thought that these guys would be more peaceful. And as I said, Hamas started in the Gaza Strip as a religious organization. However, they started as the Gazan part of Muslim Brotherhood from Egypt. Egypt annexed the Gaza Strip after the Israeli War of Independence in the 1948, and the Muslim Brotherhood itself, as it was revealed, was funded by the British security, British intelligence. So the question arises, why would they support all those reactionaries? And the answer is quite simple. You know, capitalists, for all their history, have been supporting forces of the blackest reaction because they were simply against communism. And if they're against communism, then for capitalists, all the forces matter.
Right, and you can see direct parallels to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, who were fighting against the left-wing government of Afghanistan and the Soviet Union back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. You know, the United States and its CIA, funded hundreds of millions of dollars to the Taliban and the Mujahideen. And you have to worry and wonder, why would the CIA support resistance? Why would it support genuine resistance? Why would the MI6, and CIA support the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt? Supposedly, they're enemies. And they want to create an enemy who is easy to defeat. They want to create an enemy and foster support among the people for an enemy who is good for them and who splits the basis of resistance and splits the working class. But yeah, we have to wonder, why would Qatar, has its own interests, but why would Qatar support ISIS just a few years before? Why would they support these NATO Islamists in Libya, and then support a genuine resistance force? This is the same policy. This is not a changed policy in their support for Hamas. This is the same policy which caused them to support ISIS. And you could even say that, and many people do say that, we should support the Taliban and we should support ISIS even because they're enemies of the United States. Well, this is simply not true at all. Qatar is closely tied to the United States, and these forces which created ISIS and created these pro-NATO Islamists in Libya, they're fostered by the CIA, the American intelligence, and the British intelligence. So, these are not genuine resistance movements, and this is should be seen as a continuation of this policy which has existed for decades and even goes back all the way to the 1800s, 1870s, and 1880s when the British colonial empire was encouraging Islamist movements because they were constantly having to deal with rebellion and revolt in their colonial holdings, and so they wanted to create these kind of extremist forces who would alienate regular people. And this is what happened in Palestine, that now there is no secular resistance, basically. And communists today, they always talk about, oh, there's PFLP, which is kind of a left-wing Palestinian resistance group that says, oh, working with Hamas is good right now. Oh, there's PFLP fighting. There's DFLP. There are these left-wing. All these Shia militias are more left-wing. But you have to wonder. Well, you don't have to wonder. It's a fact that these forces have been completely marginalized. The PFLP and these more secular and left-wing forces. That the plan of Israeli intelligence, the plan of American and British intelligence, has been successful. The communist and secular forces of resistance have been completely destroyed and marginalized. And Hamas has helped accomplish that. Hamas has been hostile to secular forces, and of course, Muslim Brotherhood is hyper reactionary. So you have to wonder the logic and the sense behind support for ISIS or the Taliban. This is the same logic being applied, and really it's people say, oh, these things don't matter. Oh, Taliban's beliefs don't matter. ISIS's beliefs don't matter, because all that matters is this kind of binary anti-imperialism where, oh, as long as we're fighting the U.S., we're good. No, you're not fighting the U.S. Support for ISIS is support for the U.S. Support for the Taliban is support for the U.S. Because the U.S. wanted these groups to exist. They wanted them to be fighting them.
Exactly. Uh, I also see some new people joining us, and I'd like to say hello to all our viewers. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you have not done it before. And if you want to ask the streamers any question, you can go to the link stream.politsturm.com. I will duplicate it in the chat as well. And by this link, you can ask us a question, and we will answer it right now when it's here.
Right, and we can connect this. It's not just U.S. intelligence and British intelligence and Israeli that supports these reactionaries. It's countries like Iran. They support Shia Islamists. Perhaps less extreme form of Islamism, but it's still a form of Islamism that Iran supports, and Hamas and Qatar. Or sorry, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, who support more Sunni groups and extreme groups. So it's not just British and American. There are local bourgeois forces who are very interested in certain groups existing and certain groups fighting, and they want them to be proxies of themselves. They're not going to allow them to be genuine representatives of the Palestinian struggle and the Palestinian bourgeoisie. They're going to be reflecting and impressing a policy upon them, which is tied up with support for these local states like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. This is. So to say that this isn't entangled in these wider issues is just totally wrong.
So Hamas has the support of Iran, support of different Muslim states in the region, and what's more important for us is that it was created and supported by Israel itself, because they wanted to split the resistance, and they wanted to simply get rid of the resistance fighters for secular, independent, and even socialist Palestine. What's more interesting, as it was mentioned before, is that Netanyahu himself supported Hamas. After the conflict, several major news media revealed that even in 2019, Netanyahu was still supporting Hamas, up to claiming at the Likud Congress that anybody who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy, he said, to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank. We will come to this topic a bit later, the differences between the West Bank and Gaza. But the fact is that Hamas is the best enemy for Israel. You see, they're not actually fighting for Palestinian independence. All they're doing is doing different provocative things and using millions of the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip as living shields against the IDF. Of course, it doesn't whitewash the IDF, but it also means that Hamas, as they're Islamists, they don't actually care about the Palestinian people. One of the things that I want to say here is that when the imperialist wars break out, communists have large interest in opposing them, not just because they're pacifists, but because the imperialist war allows capitalists to bring different excessive measures and bring tons of chauvinist propaganda, split the opposition. It allows them to shut the communists up, and well, it's just more difficult to work. So every action that is performed by communists, communists, for example, are not rushing into making uprisings here and there. This is some sort of anarchist way of work, and communists stand for clear-minded work. They stand for using every opportunity, and of course, they are not using the logic everything or nothing. It's not the way communists act. Of course, we're not talking about Islamists because Islamists have their own ideas. They are unprincipled enough, and we as communists basically don't care about Islamists, about their goals. We simply oppose them. But when we come to the case of the Palestinian independence, we can see that it cannot be achieved by an organization that was actually created by its own enemy. And Israel on itself, as I said before, in the face of Hamas, they have a perfect enemy. You see, Hamas isn't strong enough to destroy the state of Israel, but they are strong enough to make a threat, to make a vision of threat. And the IDF in Netanyahu said, like, look, they bomb our cities, they kill civilians, they're terrorists. This is why we need to have national unity. This is why we need to have millions of dollars poured into IDF, into military complex. This is why we need to have a strong support of the United States, because they're gonna aid our military forces, etc., etc.
Right, and part of Islamism and part of the goals of Islamism, that we oppose as communists, is they have this idealist and spiritual background for their goals, and to take it from the idea of the propaganda of the deed, this anarchist kind of notion that violent action will inspire the other forces around the world, and people will see it through propaganda and be encouraged to rebel. Well, I think this lies at the heart of the Al-Aqsa Flood operation. That that's kind of why they named it Al-Aqsa Flood, as we talked about it at the beginning. It's to motivate, and to perform this propaganda of the deed, and to encourage basically a military solution, right? And basically saying Hamas is making this by doing this operation and taking territory. They're saying, look, we can defeat Israel. We can defeat them militarily and kick them out. And that's basically what Hamas says that they plan to do after they win. Which is completely unrealistic that they would win in this way, this military way. That they say they want to kick out, Jewish, the Zionists. They want to kick out and make it a Muslim state. And so this is an extreme goal that is not going to rally the forces of Palestine. But one thing that I wanted to bring up is that being a national liberation movement, that doesn't completely erase, their goals. Are they actually going to bring about national liberation? And that's why we mentioned these other states before, like Qatar and Saudi Arabia. They're going to have a voice in Hamas's ear, and they're going to be basically the final word. If Israel itself isn't the final word, Israel has many people infiltrating Hamas. But to give the example of Hezbollah, this is another major group like Hamas. Just as big and supported by many militias. Hamas is supported by some militias, and Hezbollah is supported by many Shia militias, and they're based in Lebanon. And the issue there is that you have the imperialist interest of states involved in the actions and motivations of Hezbollah and Hamas. That with Hezbollah, you've got Iran's imperialist interests. They are looking at Iraq and Syria and seeing this kind of vacuum of state power that has been left by the U.S. destruction in Iraq. The U.S. completely destroyed the state structure of Iraq and balkanized Iraq and Syria with these autonomous states in both countries. So Iran is looking to project its influence and project its force, and of course call that progressive, and calls on us to support them in the same way that many people call for support to Russia. These are the forces that are entangled in this national liberation movement, and there are similarities to Ireland and the IRA movement there, that people say, oh, it doesn't matter that the IRA, stopped supporting socialism, and this provisional IRA moved more towards nationalism, because this is a national struggle. Well, at the end of the day, you're just going to maintain bourgeois property relations, and this call to say, oh, the national liberation struggle isn't completed in a place like Northern Ireland. You could say that today, and so anything could be excused. Any action and policy in Northern Ireland could be excused by saying, oh, this national liberation struggle is incomplete. And my family fought in that struggle, so I have some permission to speak and say that today there is bombings and attacks by the new IRA, the NIRA, which exists today, and this is not supported by normal people in Northern Ireland. The working class and Catholic sectarianism is not helpful to the liberation of Northern Ireland, and but you could say whatever you want because the national liberation movement is incomplete. Well, that doesn't mean I have to support the new IRA, because what the new IRA is actually doing is not helpful to our movement. They're even today, the new IRA are setting off these bombs and these pipe bombs, and it's as if the troubles have never ended. But there's no forward movement. There's no progressive developments happening. Because the leadership of this resistance is totally idealist and totally obsessed with propaganda of the deed, and that's not going to help with creating a communist resistance. And even on the issues of national liberation, this is not helpful to have this propaganda of the deed notion and to have these unrealistic and sectarian ideas entrenched in the leadership of the resistance. That is as totally, we are of course against it as communists, but fundamentally it's not helpful and it's not productive to have these ideas baked into our movement and leading us, and we have no ability to critique them. And that's a big part of online discussion and propaganda today, that people have these extreme reactions to what's going on, and it's so emotional that it's hard to discuss it from a serious perspective, and that's the way it is in Northern Ireland. There are people who are hardline, oh yeah, we have to be bombing, we have to be on the offensive, but this seriously alienates many normal people in Northern Ireland, and I'm sure that the same is true. But even if it's not alienating, the goals and the short-term goals, long-term goals that they seek to accomplish aren't actually helpful.
I think the point that should be made clear is that in every national liberation case situation, it's very complicated and it differs from each other. So if we take the Palestinian case, there, as I said before, we have two different powers. One of them is Hamas, which is acting on the Gaza Strip, and another one is PLO, with its leader organization Fatah, which is acting in the West Bank. And this is where it makes a difference. So remember before I said that Hamas was created in order to split the resistance. And yes, when the world system of socialism existed, the Soviet Union existed, Palestinian struggle received support from the Soviet Union, from the socialist countries, from the progressive forces, and they were the face of the Palestinian resistance. However, after 1991, the Soviet Union is no more, and they have no more funding. This is why they become quite weak. And on the contrary, Hamas gets the attention of the Middle Eastern reactionary monarchies. They start receiving money, and this is why they kept growing more and more. And at the early 2000s, the PLO's authority was basically placed upon Yasser Arafat alone. He was the well-known face of the resistance, and with his death in 2004, Fatah quickly became less popular. As I said, when the Israeli forces retreated from the Gaza Strip, there were elections, and despite PLO being the face of the Palestinian resistance for basically decades, Hamas managed to win these elections. And one of the first things they started was doing actions against Fatah, against the PLO. They started open fighting against the secular forces of Palestine. And the situation that we have right now is that, first of all, the state of Palestine doesn't exist in reality. Like, formally, it does exist. However, in fact, they do not control the majority of their territory, and they have the second largest exclave basically under control of the hostile organization of the Hamas. And in this case, well, these secular forces have no support, while Hamas, as I said before, has millions of dollars coming as aid from Iran, from Qatar, from Arab Emirates. So in this case, equalizing Hamas and the Palestinian people is not true. In fact, Hamas has very reactionary program, and when they were created in 1987, they had their charter in which they openly proclaimed they want to destroy the state of Israel and they want to create an Islamist monarchy. Sorry, not monarchy, but simply an Islamist state. They had lots of mentions of Allah in their charter, and if we take the secular Palestinian resistance charters and constitutions, we can see that not just they don't mention the God in their texts, but they also advocate for rights for everyone. Like, they make clear difference. There is Israel and there are Jews, and Hamas isn't actually doing that. Of course, when they started to be more popular, thanks to all this money, they felt they need to make their appearance more moderate, so that people did not see their Islamist fanatics. They accepted more moderate new charter in 2017. It's very moderate. It was created especially to be very moderate. However, from mass media, every attempt, like every question to their leadership, will you finally denounce the old charter, were met with a very serious and aggressive no. We do not want to eliminate, to condemn the old charter. And this means that they are doing these things just because they want to hide their real objectives. And as I said, there is a big difference between Hamas as Islamist movement and PLO, Fatah, different popular fronts included in the PLO. And these organizations, they were fighting for real, secular, independent Palestine. And what Hamas is fighting for is not an independent Palestine, but another Islamist state. One of the things that I want... Yes, let me finish. One of the things that I want to show you is one of the example of the secular propaganda from 1970s. So you see, there is a poster that says Al-Fatah Revolution, and if you take a closer look at the letters that form the icon of Palestine, they say that it's about equal rights for everyone. For the Palestinians have always lived in peace, Muslims, Christians, and Jews in the Holy Land. This was the goal of the secular Palestinian resistance movement, which was commonly referred to as simply the Palestinian resistance. And it's this image that Hamas wanted to steal in the early 2000s. You see, they became the major power, but they wanted to keep this image because they wanted to have support from major leaders from different countries. So they wanted everyone to think they're basically the same. Like, look, it's basically the same. We do not want to make ethnic cleanses. We don't want to make Islamist state. Look, we're just like Fatah. We're just like PLO. While in reality, they were not.
Right, and again, about what kind of state is going to be created by Hamas, this is not going to be one which is totally independent and representative of the Palestinian people. It's going to be, because Hamas is so tied and dependent on, Qatar and Saudi Arabia and these other states, there's going to be economic, relations, and there's going to be an unequal economic relation between, Hamas, who will be developing this new Palestinian state, and these other regional powers. But one question that we have to approach, people in the chat are saying, and this is a common thing as well, if you don't support Hamas and this military solution, what do you support? What is there to be supported? And this is totally forgetting the basis of the communist position and the communist theory that we can't totally separate the military and the social. There isn't a hard distinction in these categories, that if we have the social support of the people, then we have military strength and we can win in these violent conflicts. But currently, this basis of the military victory that Hamas says that they advocate, and these other groups say, oh, we can win this military victory, this is not a realistic approach to winning in Israel. This is so to say, oh, anything but this position is incorrect. Well, that's not going to defeat Israel. The advanced military of Israel is has nuclear weapons. It has support of the United States and the strongest imperialist states of the world. So the idea of a totally just military victory with no social aspect it is ridiculous. And so people say that, oh, the social aspect is tied up in support for Hamas. Well, this again is self-contradictory, that Hamas's positions don't support the kind of social unity that it's needed to bring about this victory. And to give an example, we would say that we need to organize the working class of Israel and Palestine, and we should not draw distinct borders between Israel and Palestine when we organize the workers. And that's reflected in the economy as well, that Palestinian workers are the basis for the Israeli economy, and these unemployed, this pool of labor in Gaza of unemployed Palestinians is relied upon by Israel for its economic growth and its economic capabilities. So organizing Palestinian workers on the basis of workers' rights on a communist basis, this has real military, and success potential, or as opposed to this purely military front where we say we're going to form traditional front lines and fight Israel, in this broad war, with Lebanon and Syria and Gaza. This has been attempted in the past. There were wars with even more powerful forces that totally failed. Egypt and Syria and all these states with state-backed, militaries and jets and tanks. Even these failed to defeat Israel militarily. So now that the military forces are weaker, you're calling for the same solution. That's absolutely wrong, and it's the communist answer which actually gives a real victory, the real potential for victory, which is undermining Israel's the basis of their economy, which is on these exploited Palestinian workers, and organizing them gives you a base to resist Israeli oppression. And this is not being done. This is not the focus of such a movement. And by calls to the national liberation struggle, you completely override what is going to bring about victory, which is organizing the workers who are living inside Israel, who are oppressed within Israel, and they have the potential to do things that an outside military person and a soldier in a trench, that they cannot, infiltrate Israeli society, and the border walls, have been successful, but the border walls cannot repel the basis of their own economy, which is these millions of Palestinian workers who are so exploited, and this success is left on the floor and is totally dropped to the floor in favor of propaganda based on Muslim solidarity and these international militias giving a military response. We have this focus on these militias and on Hamas, but we totally neglect the actual Palestinian people.
What I also like to say that not all the movements that fight for their independent state can be called national liberational. You see, even if they represent the part of the bourgeoisie, well, Nazis were also represented the part of the bourgeoisie, but and they were in fact fighting against Western capitalism. But we all know as communists that the root of both Nazism and capitalism is the same. They are basically together in this case. And if we take the communist approach to things like Islamist resistance against capitalism, we can clearly refer to Lenin, because this question was brought to the communists before. If we take, for example, the 1920s, when the Soviet Union was created, when the national liberational struggle was on its horizon, we can see that Islamist forces are created here as well. And in fact, the Soviet Union made a clear distinction between them. First of all, I'd like to show the quote from one of the Lenin's work that we were using in our statement. It's not every struggle against imperialism that we should support. We will not support the struggle of the reactionary classes against imperialism, and we will not support an uprising of the reactionary classes against imperialism and capitalism. It's very important to mention because, as you can see, basically all the sides today claim themselves to be anti-imperialist, to be anti-authoritarian, to be for liberty, for liberation, etc., etc. Russians say that, like, not Russians themselves, but the Russian government. China says the same thing. Even Americans and Europeans claim, when they speak about Africa, look, China and Russia are expanding in Africa. They are making literally neo-colonialist policies in Africa. We need to oppose them. It's a common thing for bourgeois to dress themselves as anti-imperialists. And another thing is that this question was of such priority, of such importance, that it was raised on the Second Comintern Congress. And here again, it was Lenin who wrote thesis on this topic, and he made it clear that communists should not support Islamists. You see, this is what he wrote. Like there is, with regard to the more backward states and nations in which feudal or patriarchal peasant relations predominate, it's particularly important to bear in mind, first, that all communist parties must assist the bourgeois democratic liberation movement in these countries, and that the duty of rendering the most active assistance rests primarily with the workers of the country the backward nation is colonially or financially dependent on. Second, the need for struggle against the clergy and other influential reactionary and medieval elements. And third, the need to combat pan-Islamism and similar trends, which strive to combine the liberation movement against European and American imperialism with an attempt to strengthen the positions of the khans, landowners, mullahs, etc. And we can see that the current case we have now is clearly the one that was described.
Right, and in the case of this history of the Soviet Union, it was really Khrushchev who took power after Stalin, who started supporting national liberation movements more. Supporting the Kurds in Iraq, and these groups that like Barzani, who is a Kurdish leader in northern Iraq. This did not help the communist movement there. And we can see the evidence of that today. So this support for national liberation movements, is a revisionist policy, and this hyper support for national liberation movements. So it's not as if Lenin is saying we shouldn't support national liberation, but I mean the history is clear that we have to understand the context and understand the actual conditions and social conditions. And I want to respond briefly to this comment from the chat about Vietnam and them saying, oh, Northern Vietnam won against the United States in a totally military basis. That is completely incorrect, and it ignores actual history of how the Vietnamese War was won. That there was massive support for the North within the South, and this was the basis for the success in the Tet Offensive, which was a great military victory by North Vietnam, but which didn't, the Tet Offensive, that the military capabilities were limited, that even the greatest victory of North Vietnam militarily couldn't accomplish much. But what really won the war was the support for North Vietnam among the South Vietnamese. And so it was impossible for the US and its puppet state in the South to maintain control and to maintain, continuing to fight the war, because the people of the South did not support their government. And the people of the South were constantly betraying the Southern government and sending intelligence information to the North, and helping the North, infiltrate the facilities in the South. So this was not a military victory alone. It's not exactly like the Soviet Union and Germany, where there's a front line and there's a battle like this. And even in that war, even in World War II, the social aspect has been neglected in the telling today. That the peoples of Eastern Europe and of Western Europe, they rebelled against the Nazis, and this was very helpful to the victory of the Soviet Union. This internal rebellion, but more so among other revolutionary moments in history, that you need the support of the people in order to accomplish this military victory. And if you neglect that, you are neglecting history and you're neglecting reality, and you're not going to accomplish victory. And as I said before, you had jets and tanks and planes and missiles targeting Israel during the 60s and 70s, and even the support of some of the most powerful regional states, and they could not win a military victory in Israel. But by rallying the people, you could finally accomplish this victory, which has eluded the people who want to fight a military battle. Really, this social victory and this rallying of the people is clearly the only way to win such a struggle. And when we fixate on this military success, and just like Al-Aqsa Flood, this operation itself gives this sense of, oh, we're having these military victories, but really, there wasn't a great military success, and all those military gains were quickly reversed. And so now, in the period of the many weeks after October 7th, it's clear that it would be necessary to have a social support for any victory, and that's completely neglected by these groups today. That where they're not organizing, they're neglecting to organize the workers of Israel, who are Palestinian as well. So it's just not a comprehensive view of the situation, and it's not a comprehensive view of history.
Sure. And what are the actual sides of this conflict? When we published our statement, a lot of people rushed to claim that, hey, you wrote that you don't support any of the sides of the conflict. You are left calm. You want to stand upon the conflict. However, the reality, as we have already described, is that the Palestinian people is not actually represented in this conflict. Yes, it's the victim of the conflict, but on one side we have Israel, we have one big military state, and on the other side we have an organization that was created with the support of this exact military state. It's a war between the aggressor and basically its puppet, which got out of control. However, the main thing here that I want to point on is that capitalists want us to believe that the sides are good Israel and unconditionally bad Palestine, because you see, Hamas is bad, Hamas are terrorists, and Hamas is Palestinian. So they end with whitewashing the IDF. Like, for them, Hamas killed civilians, so it's fine when IDF kills civilians too. Palestinians deserved it, and they share collective responsibility. This is how capitalist mass media think, and they want us to think as well. They want us to believe that Palestine is Hamas. However, as I said, we know that Israel was the one who supported Hamas in becoming the biggest power in Gaza. And they did it because, well, they were against communists, they are anti-communist, just as all the capitalists, and they wanted to weaken the communists. And sure, they succeeded in it. At the same time, we see another position, which is basically the same. Israel is bad and Palestine is unconditionally good. And either the people who make this position are silent about Hamas, like seriously, we see lots of people simply not writing anything about Hamas. They just say Palestinian people this, Palestinian people that, while the problem is obvious. It's Hamas, it's not PLO, it's not Mahmoud Abbas with his Fatah. In fact, Abbas managed to make a response to the escalation only several hours after it started. And what's more interesting, he had a conversation with Venezuelan leader, Maduro, where he said that Hamas is not representing the Palestinian people. Later, this statement was deleted from the site of the state of Palestine, but all the news media basically managed to spread the information as it is. You see, even Fatah accepts that Hamas and Palestinian people are not the same. We see that the secular forces of the Palestinian resistance, firstly, they exist, and secondly, even if they are subdued, even if they are suppressed by Hamas, obviously because Hamas has millions of money and secular forces have nothing. Yes, they had the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union doesn't exist. They have nobody to support them. And this is why it's important to show that Hamas exists. It's not the Palestinian people. In fact, Hamas doesn't actually care about the Palestinian people. You see, they could simply not start their raid, and hundreds of thousands of lives would be saved right now. There would not be this humanitarian disaster which takes place in Gaza right now. We don't need to whitewash Islamists. And this side,
Well,
this side also forces us to believe that Palestine is Hamas, which is wrong.
right, and about the representation of the Palestinian people via Hamas, like the Palestinian Authority, Hamas is interested in maintaining property relations as they currently exist. So Hamas isn't interested in actually fighting a battle that is winnable. Hamas isn't interested in organizing the working classes of Palestine and the lowest segment of the working class and the unemployed. Hamas is not interested in organizing these forces to bring about a victory. So you have to wonder, how can we say, Hamas is representative when they're not going to do the actual mustering of the forces of resistance, and why don't they do this? Because they're afraid of the power of the working class, and they're afraid of bringing these forces to bear. Right, because Hamas wants to maintain property relations after they take over. So this is not going to Hamas isn't actually going to be fighting a battle using these social forces that are available to it. So the Palestinian Authority isn't very much different in that respect. And to say, of course, we'll, of course, we have to recognize that the situation in Gaza has been so horrible for so long, and it is truly an ongoing humanitarian crisis. But it's the interest of Israel to worsen this humanitarian situation in Gaza. It's Israel's interest to create the worst conditions possible and to use this conflict to do so because they want to, as we said at the beginning, depopulate Gaza and to depopulate the West Bank and to terrify the Palestinian people into fleeing. Hamas and Israel agree that they don't want the working peoples of Palestine organized, and they don't want them to, you know, be organized on a class basis because they want to maintain these same property relations. So we can say, oh, the Palestine Authority is totally dependent on Israel, and so that's going to affect its decisions, economically dependent on Israel. Well, Hamas is interested in maintaining the same basis of property relations, and that limits what Hamas is going to do. That Hamas is not going to bring about a communist revolution. Not saying that that's the goal exactly, but just to say that Hamas is afraid to win. Hamas is afraid to bring about these forces who could bring it victory because Hamas knows that if it brings about the empowerment for the working classes, that these working classes will, stand up for themselves and their workers' rights, and they won't agree with Hamas on these issues of property relations and of Islamism even.
Sure, and at this point, the position that you don't support either side, so you don't support Palestine and you're left calm is basically nonsense, which is completely built on emotions and basically represents the position that the capitalists are promoting. They say Palestine is Hamas, so Israel is good. And these guys say Palestine is Hamas, so Hamas is good. And this is not the case here. In fact, a lot of people, like I guess intentionally misunderstood our statement, despite the fact that we wrote in our statement that the escalation was started by the Reactionary organization, which was currently founded by the Israeli state, and statements of support of Palestinian people cannot be clear if they do not condemn Hamas, because in other case they would mean support not for the Palestinian people but for this reactionary organization. And you see, Hamas has a lot of supporters among the bourgeois states, among the Islamist states, and we think that communists should not be the ones to support Hamas. It's especially important because, again, many people refer to the sentence neither side can be supported by workers and communists, while just in the same paragraph we wrote that we need to support the genuine struggle of the Palestinians for secular Palestine, and this is why we need to resist attempts to turn this struggle into support for Islamists. It's not something new, it's the tactics that communists have been using for decades. And of course, we need to oppose Israel's militarism, we need to oppose their hypocrisy, but we need to disassociate ourselves from Hamas, from Islamists. It's really important. And another thing why we drive so much attention to this thing is because it's quite strange, but basically every other official communist party in the world refused to point on Hamas. On the other side, even such organizations as KKE and TKP always write about support for Palestinian people, but they do not write any words of condemnation against Hamas. So first of all, this is the TKP's tweet right when this conflict started. And I'd like to remind that it started by Hamas raiding the Israeli territory. We see only statements of Palestinian people, but no Hamas. And on the previous weekend, so this is the statement of KKE, no signs of Hamas as well. And this, for example, is the Declaration on Palestine of the 23rd International Meeting of Communist and Workers' Parties, which happened during the previous weekend. So, yeah, here you can see it clearly. And the whole declaration has no word about Hamas. While it's obvious that Hamas started this escalation and they are responsible, they are at the site of the conflict. Like, it's Hamas who launches rocket strikes against Israelis, not the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people are actually suffering from that because they are targeted by the IDF air and rocket strikes as well. Again,
Right, and we cannot forget that Netanyahu and Israel wanted this war. They were waiting and begging for this war to happen, and in fact, they conspired, to defend Hamas and say that Hamas was interested in peace. They said these things because they wanted Hamas to attack. They were waiting for an opportunity to begin this war, and people who say, "Oh, that." Because we understand that Israel is interested in this, in that a beginning of fighting, Israel is interested in using the fighting for its own interests. But because we point that out, people say that, oh, you don't care about the Palestinian struggle. But if you look at what we publish and if you look at, everything that we report on, it would be impossible to say that, we are, we have no position or that we support or we're both siding this struggle. We clearly have in our reporting reflect what we stand for. So if you're looking at what we're saying, then you would understand our position, and just because you cherry pick a few words from our statement, you can draw it out to be something that it's not. But in reality, the communist position is being ignored by many groups, and social media hysteria and all these things have built up a real problematic echo chamber for discussion, where if you increase the size of the echo and you repeat what everyone else is saying on social media, then this is the interest of people to just be in agreement with the broader left, and we're all saying the same thing. Of course leftists are interested in criticizing Israel, but just criticizing Israel and not understanding the struggle and not understanding the resistance is not going to bring about a good or a full analysis. And that's what we're pointing out, is that people have totally neglected a full and complete analysis of the situation, and it's kind of idealist. They take up these idealist positions, which are encouraged by the current situation of social media, which encourages emotional reactions and these sorts of things, instead of understanding that there is something going on. There's class relations, and the interests of national regimes are at play. And if you don't speak critically and think critically about the actions of Israel, as we repeated ourselves again and again in the stream, if you're neglecting what we've talked about, and if you neglected all these problems, then you are not understanding why the Palestinian struggle has failed for so long, and you're not understanding why the communist struggle has moved backwards for many decades. So that is harmful to the struggle, worldwide.
Yeah, exactly. And one important issue is that many people think that there are good guys, everything is bad, but there are good guys, and they struggle for greater good, and we just need to sit and support all the good things, good because somebody said they're good, and that's it. However, in reality, if you take a look at the state of the international communist movement for more than a decade, the communists are destroyed. They're so weak. They have no good organizations. They have no good international communication. And the fact that all these questions are not raised makes a big question for the leaders of these organizations. And in case of this current escalation, well, you can see from the statements of the so-called international meeting that such an important issue as like writing the communist position on Hamas was simply ignored, while it's in fact a very important topic. And when you say like, yes, support for the Palestinian people, capitalists gonna use it. They gonna say, look, these communists support Palestine. Everybody knows Palestine is Hamas, so they're supporting Hamas. You see, communists are supporting actual terrorists. And for example, for the communists in Israel, it would make a big difference. It would be a great threat for them, up to like leading to prohibiting their organizations, banning them. This is important in Sweden, in Greece, basically everywhere where there is a problem of migration and where there is a big Arab community. Of course, it would lead to big problems. And it's not just this fact, but also that we constantly see that this question is always linked to social democrats. You know, when statements about Hamas are made, they're made in such a context that is shown by the author of this or that material as, you know, everybody who raises the question of Hamas is a supporter of EU, of the US, of NATO, and social democrat. And this context is what we see in, for example, materials of the Communist Party of Greece. One of them is just on your screen. This material was published a week ago. It was written by Georgios Marinos, member of the Politburo of the Central Committee of the KKE, and this is what they write. Syriza leaders draining in the waters of social democratic degeneration are looking for pretexts. They claim that the struggle in the Gaza Strip is the struggle of Hamas, not of the Palestinian people, and that the operation took place on the border with Israel is a terrorist one. The same position was taken by their leader, Dimitrios Koutsoumbas, who published an article about the Israel-Palestine war conflict and the developments in the region a week ago. And here we can see the same claim. They, besides actually good analysis of interests of different capitalist states in the region, besides providing slogans for everyday work and well, the positive thing is that Koutsoumbas actually points on the importance of stating that the struggle of the Palestinian people is used by many imperialist states as justification for their own actions. And this is right. But the question arises, how can you debunk all these games of the big imperialist powers, of the big imperialist sharks, by not saying a word about Hamas? And this is what he writes. During this time, from the Hamas attack onwards, various ideologies and dangerous generalizations arise which need to be answered to equip the members and friends of the party, since they are forced to deal with them on a daily basis. And the interesting thing is that somehow among these things is identification of Hamas with the Taliban. This position is used to the fullest extent by Syriza officials to justify the US-NATO conscription and the victim-victim equation. And it says Hamas aims to liberate the Palestinian territories. In first years, it represented the middle classes of Palestine. Its massive development was a consequence of the chaotic ineffectiveness of the secular struggle, the anti-occupation and social struggle of the Palestinian people, and Its strengthening beyond are related to the upheavals of socialism. It has evolved along the way, now represents a section of the Palestinian bourgeoisie that believes that the creation of a Palestinian state must have as a key component the creation of a strong national army. On the contrary, the reactionary movement of Taliban is of known origin and evolution, and is now by chance that the US left it with a huge arsenal. However, just like we saw earlier, Hamas is also supported by major capitalist powers, including those allied with the United States. And one of the facts is that Taliban also, for the last 2 years, have been pretending that they are the national liberation movement, that they represent the whole Afghani people. And the thing is that right now they work not with the United States, but with China. And well, for China, it's well known. A lot of social chauvinists defend the theory that China is representing anti-imperialist camp. They are allies with Russia, and Russia is anti-imperialist too. You can see the context is very questionable. You see, like anybody who asks about Hamas is like, you're supporting US, EU, NATO, you're Syriza, you're social democrat. While it's actually an important topic for the communists. And if you say nothing about it, then you would only harm the communist cause.
Well, I wanted to thank everybody for listening for this 2-hour period, basically, and hopefully we've been able to address a lot of the issues that are being weighed right now. In this time, we had this criticism by Socialism for All, which I think we addressed many of the problems in our discussion here. But people asked for our response to that, and I think we covered many of these issues.
So
we could
yeah, go on. Hello? All right, so our comrade seems to have some technical issues. Well, we have already talked a lot on this topic, and I think we will go to conclusion. So, what should be the position of the communists? It's important to not to fall into different emotional hysterias, because you see, this is what the big capitalist news media want you to do. They constantly bomb the information space with different loud slogans and putting labels on all sorts of things is the essential thing for them, not for the communists. Communists, on the other side, are always interested in learning the truth and telling the truth. This is why we don't show the situation better than it is. Like, we all know the current situation in the world is bad. It's crisis. The wars are going on. The new ones are popping basically every month. Just look. In June, we had the Wagner rebellion in Russia. In July, August, we had actions in Western Africa. We also had the death of Yevgeny Prigozhin. In September, we have the problem of Karabakh. And right now, we have the Arab-Israeli escalation. You see, even Biden speaks of the old order being fallen apart, and he calls for another agreement that would make peace for another half a century. Even capitalists feel that. And in this case, we can see that they are no longer fear of using weapons to solve their problems. You see, like, if Russia does this thing in Ukraine, why shouldn't Azerbaijan do the same in their Karabakh? And if all these guys are doing the same, each capitalist looks at the current state, they look at the crisis taking place, and they ask themselves at the end, why not? Why shouldn't we use weapons? Why shouldn't we wage wars again? The actual peace is the case only when there is socialism. And right now we can see that reactionaries are raising their heads in various parts of the world. And of course, Palestine is a long-going conflict where a lot of blood has been already spilled and will be spilled, just like we see it right now. It's very important to not to succumb to any of the sides. It's very important to see the real information, to see the real way of things. Both sides, like on the international scale, claim themselves to be anti-imperialist. China says they are anti-imperialist. The United States claim they are against any sort of subjugation. They are for liberty, etc. And here we can see that the actual Palestinian resistance is not just suppressed by Islamists, but they are suppressed by the ones which were created by Israel in order to destroy this Palestinian resistance movement. Nobody says that Abbas is some sort of big figure. Of course, he's also dependent on the capitalists, and we can see that he tries to maneuver between them. Just a week ago, he was making different phone calls with basically everyone, starting from the US State Secretary, ending with Maduro, Putin, and other leaders. And of course, we don't make support for him, but whom we make support for are the people of Palestine, the workers of Palestine, and in fact, it's workers, not the capitalists, not the bourgeoisie, and not the Islamists that are dying. It's average workers being killed on both sides, and it's really important to show that the only real unity can be made only by communists, only by debunking all these social chauvinists, all these nationalist religious hysteria that is taking place right now. And of course, Palestine is an unsolved problem of national liberational struggle, because you see, it's just a fact. The Palestinians have their own state, and they struggle for this state. But of course, for us as the communists, there is a difference between state of Palestine as a secular state and another Islamist emirate of Palestine, which would be basically the same as Afghanistan. You see, Talibs are imposing their Sharia rules here, and they also try to portray themselves as national liberation struggle. And Hamas was actually doing the same in Gaza in early 2000s, when they tried to impose the similar laws for the whole city. The real tasks of the communists right now boil to open struggle against chauvinism, against racism, against any religious reaction on the part of both Israel and Palestinian Islamists. Our struggle is on the side of the Palestinian people, of the communists, of both Palestine and Israel, and they do exist. Like, there are communist parties. We don't have much information about how they are doing, and as I said, Hamas is basically dominating in the Gaza Strip, meaning that all other organizations have to work with them somehow, because otherwise, when there is 50% unemployment rate and Hamas has lots of money, they can order to basically physically kill all the organizations if they want. But they don't want to, because they want to portray themselves as moderates. And it's very important to support the communists. And if you say, like, we support the people, but we keep our mouth silent about Hamas, we don't say anything about Hamas, you're not supporting communists, you're supporting Hamas. And by this, you're supporting Israel, because Israel also wants you to think that Palestine is only Hamas.
Right, and it really reflects an enormous failure among our movement that we have totally reflected in our social media circles. That communists have created. We totally reflect these issues of bourgeois media and bourgeois propaganda, and we've not acted and spoken in a more conscious way, as a total movement, but we've reflected what we've been given by the bourgeois media and either agree with Jazeera. We rely on Al Jazeera for a lot of coverage, and at the same time we react and we reflect Western propaganda and Israeli media, and we say, we have to say the opposite of that. But we've completely failed to have an analysis of our own and to resist the kind of emotional reaction, and we've totally become entrenched in this emotional world and this propaganda world that has been created for us, this hall of mirrors and shadows that the bourgeoisie has created. We live in this place. We live in this illusion that they've created through media, and we reflect it in our own social media. So it's so important for us to uh, speak more responsibly and to not just reflect broad left trends, and to not allow social media, the way that social media works, repeating certain things, and the algorithm projecting certain narratives. We cannot submit to what the narrative or what the algorithm decides is the narrative, and what the algorithm wants to replicate, wants us to say over and over again. We have to be able to break out of this. We have to break out of this total control of the way that we speak. And they use emotion, and they use manipulation, propagandistic manipulation, to create and enforce this way of thinking.
Exactly, and this is why it's important for us to, well, Felix Dzerzhinsky, which was one of the famous Russian revolutionaries, was one of the uh, big leaders of the Russian Communist Party during the October Revolution, during the civil war in Russia. He once said that a revolutionary should keep their mind cold and their heart warm. And I think he is right. We need to analyze the situation with the scientific Marxist approach, and at the same time, like we all know about these suffering by the Palestinian people, we all know about civilians and children dying, and we all know that all these things are the consequence of capitalism. We cannot end these things without ending capitalism, and when capitalists try to force us into believing that lesser evil will actually stop all these evils, it's wrong. It's not right. It's uh, basically a call for pre-division of the world. They see that the world is divided, and it's in their interests to portray themselves as either the lesser evil or actually the good side. Russia now says we are the good side. US says we are the good side. Israel says we are the good side. See, we're against terrorists. Hamas says, see, we're the good side. We're actually Palestine. Don't think about those secular forces. We are the Palestine. We are the good side. And when everybody claims themselves to be a good side, it's a good time for communists to think who are the actual baddies and who are the actual goodies. We have been talking for more than 2 hours. However, unfortunately, we have a lot of things to discuss. And one of them was, as I saw in the chat, some people were asking, will we respond to S4A's criticism of our statement? Well, as you could see, we discussed many major issues. We hope that our viewers will understand the way we apply the Marxist theory here, and that it's not, left-com or any deviation. It's just a consequence of applying the Marxist method. As for several other arguments he made in his video, like claims of both sides in genocide or supporting settlers colonialism, uh, I think we will have a separate stream on this topic where we will discuss these and other issues as well. And as for now, you can see, like, when we announced our stream, we didn't know about the situation heating up like right now. We made an announcement, and it was just several minutes when the first news arrived about Israel expanding their military operation. So, as you can see, this event is very relevant. It like events are happening right now, and well, September gave us Azerbaijan and Karabakh situation. October gave us the Arab-Israeli escalation, and it seems that the next month is going to be full of capitalist contradictions as well. In this case, the important thing for communists to do is to keep working and to organize themselves as much as possible. And this is why we want to, you, our dear viewers, hit the like button and subscribe again if you have not done it before, and join us by following the link that is right now in the chat. You can join the ranks of our organization. There are basically hundreds of people working on producing the news from different parts of the world, from Russia, from Ukraine, from the United States, from Europe. We are all working on the same goal, and we all work on making the communist movement better. And well, we want you to join us, to support us, and I think that's it. Comrade Thomas, have you solved your internet connection problems?
Yeah, well, I'm here, and it was great being here. Great to be able to participate in this discussion. I hope we've been able to answer most of the questions from the chat. But yeah, I look forward to being here for the next stream if I can join or just listening in. So thank you for having me, and thank you for leading this discussion. And thank you to all of our listeners here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, comrades. Of course, this stream will be archived, and I think we will even make timestamps for you to find the problems that we discussed. Well, it's 2 hours, and we discussed a lot. So
Yeah, and there's so much more to discuss as well. So even within 2 hours. So if anything was left out or anything that needs to be said more, yeah, as Vasily said, we'll be talking about this issue again.
Mm-hmm. Well, for now, that's it. Thank you, and goodbye, comrades.